What the hell are you?
I'm a leprechaun, me dear.
What is real? How do you define real?
So what's your podcast about?
Oh, it's about psychology, true crime, supernatural stuff, the occasional paranormal or philosophical rant.
Well, maybe I could check it out sometime.
Look, I know the supernatural is something that isn't supposed to happen, but it does happen.
The Matrix is everything. It is all around us, even now in this very room. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth.
Do you remember something in the Bible about the last days when the dead would rise from the grave?
I remember Revelation 7:12. And I looked as he opened the sixth seal, and behold, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became as black as sackcloth, and the moon became as blood.
And the seas boiled and the skies fell.
Judgment Day.
Werewolf.
Werewolf?
There. What? There, wolf. There, castle.
Why are you talking that way?
I thought you wanted to.
No, I don't want to.
Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain. But you feel it.
Every ancient religion has its own myth about the end of the world.
Myth. Ray, has it ever occurred to you that maybe the reason we've been so busy lately is because the dead have been rising from the grave?
We're all infected. What? Whatever it is, we all carry it.
This is your nautical lantern on the dangerous seas of darkness. Let's push off from the placid shore of the status quo and explore what's beyond the horizon. I am your host, BT, and this is Truth and Shadow, your podcast of the supernatural.
Time seems to tick on like a heartbeat, the seconds pumping in the breast like a reckoning. It's this deep arterial thrum of something ancient and insistent, reminding every age that it believes itself enlightened, until the dark comes calling again. The luminous mysteries that once seemed distant and unreal gather at the edges of vision, threatening clarity and the presence of a truth entertained not in youth, but only through history. Humanity does not outgrow a monster. It simply calls them by different names. It invites them back through the front door of culture and insists the fascination is merely academic. A monster is a burden shared, a confession written in flesh and stitched together with fear. Within the human heart lie memory and experience that are not foreign to the vampire's hunger. Recognition pulses beneath the distortion. These beings endure, not because superstition survives, but because they embody something troubling and intimate about cultural change. Consider, if you will, the vampire. Pale, aristocrat, a member of the night, a seducer, parasite, immortal witness to the collapse of centuries. In the 19th century, as empires expanded and factories consumed blood and breath alike, the vampire rose from folklore into literature clothed in velvet and existential dread. The vampire did not merely drink blood, vitality, inheritance, and legacy were drained as well. Beneath the cloak lingered fears of invasion, foreign bodies crossing borders, unseen contagions spreading in like darkness. Yet culture did not merely fear the vampire, it romanticized it. Eternal life, corrupted life, offered some kind of perverse consolation against the brevity of mortal existence. The vampire became both threat and aspiration, a mirror reflecting anxieties about class, disease, sexuality, and the fragility of order. Then there stands the creature animated by hubris, the staggering progeny of ambition untempered by responsibility. When industry roared and electricity promised dominion over the very forces of nature, the tale emerged of a creator who dared to generate life without the wisdom to love it. The monster was not born malevolent. Abandonment sculpted rage from innocence. Violence echoed rejection, and in this figure appeared the Industrial Revolution's unwanted child, forged by progress, neglected by conscience. The question thundered beneath the laboratory roof: if humanity could create, should it? And if creation proceeds without compassion, what becomes of the abandoned offspring of innovation? The creature's grotesque form embodied fears of scientific overreach, mechanization, and the erosion of moral restraint in the face of progress. Zombies shamble into modern consciousness bearing a different kind of dread. They seem to be faceless, a multitude stripped of individuality. They move in endless waves. As the 20th century convulsed with world wars, ideological conformity, and mechanized slaughter, the undead horde, emblematic of the fear of dissolution into the mass, means identity could be eroded. The self risked absorption into systems too vast and impersonal to comprehend. Zombies neither seduce nor reason, they consume. Yet apocalypse narratives often reveal the greater horror lies not in the undead, but in what the living become when structures collapse. In these tales, the monster exposes the fragility of civilization and the potential brutality lurking beneath social order. Across the centuries, monsters have provided symbolic language for change too destabilizing to confront directly. Scientific revolutions, industrial upheavals, shifting moral codes, migrations, pandemics, technological accelerations. Each era births its own creatures: fangs and claws, stitches and scars, moans and rattling chains. All serve as metaphors for anxieties about power, autonomy, corruption, and mortality. Horror becomes a vessel capable of carrying volatile truths into the public imagination. The supernatural itself seems to adapt to technological landscapes, absorbing new fears and refracting them through ancient archetypes. This persistent return to monstrosity reveals something fundamental. Fear alone does not sustain these myths. Monsters function as mirrors, reflecting suppressed tensions and unarticulated doubts. Through them, cultures confess what polite discourse struggles to contain, that progress unsettles as much as it empowers, that innovation can estrange as easily as it liberates, community can dissolve into conformity, and death remains undefeated despite all advancements. And so perhaps the most unsettling revelation may be neither the existence of fanged aristocrats, or hubris giants, or howling beasts, or restless spirits. The deeper disturbance lies in the recognition that these figures are shaped from human apprehension itself. Each monster is frozen in a moment of historical unease. Each narrative pulses with the heartbeat of its age. These monsters persist because culture requires them, needs them. They are the dark grammar of transformation, the shadow cast by progress, the echo of questions that refuse silence. They stand grotesque and luminous, bearing the weight of troubling change, inviting contemplation of what humanity creates, suppresses, fears, and becomes.
You ever notice how the Victorians couldn't stop writing about the dead? They invited them to dinner, they tried to photograph them, and they even built houses for the ghosts. Maybe they saw what we still can't admit, that no matter how modern we get, we may still be afraid of progress. But under the gaslight, they were sewing monsters together, scientists building new atoms, priests fighting old demons, and poets trying to resurrect the soul they'd just as soon declare was extinct. And that's where today's guests walk in. In the fog between science and superstition, between resurrection and reanimation, she writes about faith that still bleeds and creatures that can't decide if they're damned or saved. So here to help us make sense of it all is an author who's constructed stories that bring back that Gothic horror feel. She is the Gothic theologian, the resurrectionist of literature, the seamstress of souls. Eleanor, welcome back to Truth and Shadow Podcast.
That was very flattering, a very flattering introduction, so thank you for that.
So I wanted to first start by a little bit of catching up. It's been a little while since we last spoke, and since that time you have written and released another book in your horror series, The Wake of Malice. Can we just give a little synopsis of what that book was about and where people can find it?
Wake of Malice is the third, as you said, in my Thomas Edmund Gilroy Dominican Vampire Slayer series. So I had him take on vampires, and then I had in A Bloody Habit, and then came back in Brother Wolf to deal with Franciscans and werewolves. And then I sort of flippantly joked that, well, next I'll have to do Jesuits. And, well, since the Jesuits were very much missionaries, I'd send them someplace and make it a very culturally specific battle. So why not zombie leprechauns in Ireland? And so the story is about an Irish expat who's turned into a reporter. And he goes back to Ireland to investigate the story of a priest embezzling money from a charitable fund. And when he gets there, he finds out that there's murder, there's someone who's dabbling in the occult, and it's all very centered in this tiny community on the west coast of Ireland. And it's this lapsed Catholic expat having to come to terms with his the heritage of Catholicism, the heritage of being Irish and leaving Ireland, but also what death does to a very small community. So I realized afterwards, and have jokingly referred to this many times, I think it's the funniest novel I've written, but it's all about death. I think I went from funeral to funeral. Everyone's always going to a funeral in this book. And my protagonist, Hugh Buckley, has to grapple with that and also figure out how to investigate as a reporter. He's actually a terrible reporter. He's an awful reporter. He's a terrible investigator. But that makes him really great as the narrator for a work of Gothic fiction. He was tremendous fun, very easy to write, Hugh Buckley.
And then, like I said last time we had spoken, we had really focused a lot on the Victorian era because this is your literary background, educational background specifically, and so it's similar to your writing. From what I've kind of looked at, Victorian horror itself really wasn't about the focusing on the dead, so to speak. It was kind of used as an allegory for something else, maybe for trying to understand or bring back the soul after the Renaissance and this drive for intellectualism over spiritualism. And so these Victorians seem to have this weird, I'm going to say kind of this fear but obsession with corpses. It's kind of what I've looked at. And it's like there's this progress that is going on in their world that seems to be accelerating, and there's no grace behind it. I wanted to ask if you're writing The Wake of Malice, if you worked any of that idea in that same kind of fear that the world is animated, but it's not really alive.
I think it very much influences the Gothic tradition, so it is cropping up in my writing. And you started to say the Industrial Revolution. Don't leave it out, because that was part of the March of Progress. and the rush to urbanization and the sense, as you said, we're getting progressively smarter, more intellectual. We aren't shackled by superstition, but they were so wildly, crazily superstitious because they threw out metaphysics. I mean, hundreds of years earlier. So their world didn't make sense anymore. How do you explain this? How do you explain the irregular things that go on in the world? But how do you also explain, as you mentioned, soul? How do you explain that when we become hyper rationalists post enlightenment? Oh, we're so enlightened. And yet there's a 100% death rate among human beings. And we are concerned about what happens after and how it influences us now. So it becomes this supreme anxiety, which frankly pervades to the present day, because there's not a balanced peace in the attitude towards death itself. So there's a preoccupation. In my first novel, there was a seance, and that was because they were all doing it. And one of the things that you see in Gothic novels as well, which I absolutely love, and it was the thing that captured my imagination when I first started really delving into Gothic novels as an undergraduate, was that they had the ingrained mistrust of Catholicism. It's like those papists, they're foreigners, we've tried to repress them, we've disenfranchised them. I mean, Catholic emancipation was only a couple of years before slavery was abolished, so they were so constrained and contained. But especially in the 19th century, you see this radical fascination for things Catholic and an aesthetic appropriation. It's almost as if they're saying, we're so anxious about things that concern the soul and life and death and salvation and damnation, and we don't have the tools anymore. So we need to steal them from the papists and make sure the papists are contained at the same time. But we really need that equipment. Either that or they would go off in the other direction and dabble in the occult, all the weird fascination, the rise of Freemasonic fascination as well. It's all interlaced into that culture and that society. So it informed the Romantics. It informed the rise of the Gothics, also very closely intertwined with the Romantics. I was just teaching a class just yesterday to some students and talking about the Pre-Raphaelites and thinking about all the weirdness and bizarre preternatural preoccupation that you see there. It's just a really rich arena for Gothic monsters.
And then something that I was enjoying is this idea of, you use the Irish folklore, the leprechaun, right? And this, I'm going to use the word zombie adjacent, and I don't really mean it in any kind of bad way because once again it's fiction, but this zombie adjacent kind of leprechaun, clearly drawn from some Irish folklore. But I was wondering, when you're looking at some of the good people, and how maybe they were looked at like revenants or representations of the dead, that it wasn't that they were fairies, they were ghosts, for example. And do you find that this might have been the idea within this time period, that they're not so much magical tricksters, but lost ghosts that haven't made their way home yet?
I think very much that's the case. And I think this goes back to the spiritual side of things. So you've thrown out a moral spiritual anthropology that is sophisticated enough to deal with things like people who die and are not perfected. So I mean, we just finished celebrating All Saints and All Souls. The Catholic Church covers all our grounds are covered, right? And it's very articulate. But you've thrown out the whole notion of purgation after death. So what do you do with people who you really don't want to be damned, but you're not quite sure how to, clean them up and make them heaven worthy? So with the Irish, and that you have to remember something that I sort of stumbled on, which hadn't really connected in my head, that the repressions in England were also repressions in Ireland. So Ireland, for several hundred years, had not had a very coherent catechetical connection to the Catholic Church. So all sorts of irregular superstition was just rife, and irregular practices, many of which centered on the wakes. I mean, I was quite deliberate when I chose the word wake or in my title. The things they would do with the bodies, getting hopelessly drunk and then dancing around with the dead body. Like what? Or yeah, pranks with the dead body, the superstitions of you have to leave a window open, or different behaviors you have to do or don't have to do, what they signify. And then, ironically, when some of the constraints were lifted and Catholic priests could really do more in Ireland, they were rejected by the locals as, who are you, you invaders? We won't listen to England, and we sure won't listen to Rome. This is how we've always done things. So, but they're still trying to tangle with this question of what happens to our dead. There's a line in Aquinas, and I'm going to mess it up trying to do it from memory, but I have it. It was quoted in my first novel, Bloody Habit. It's something like, it would cause a man. It's about the respect of the body and how you respond to a dead body and how you should treat a dead body. And this is the grounds for the moral justification for things like scientific experimentation on body. And the church has really looked closely at this. But one thing that Aquinas says is it would cause a man disquiet if he thought unnatural things could happen to his body after death. So it's the respect of the dead and concern for the dead and the obligation to pray for the dead. But when you throw all of that out and you still have dead bodies and you have irregular happenings in the world that you are no longer equipped to explain, you're going to say, are there magical creatures? Are there, or are there souls who are somehow tied to this world who can hurt us or frighten us or are asking something of us? What on earth could that be? This is why I go back to again and again that the Catholic answer sort of, it deals with all of these things in a non-threatening way. It's okay, all right, a soul bound by this earth. Well, okay. Or a soul bound in purgatory. This is what we do. Here we go. It's pretty practical and pragmatic, actually, when you go down to it. I mean, I'd like to remind people there is an exorcism in the rite of baptism. So exorcism is actually part of the ordinary workings of the church. So there is the high, filmable, dramatic, outrageous, seemingly the extraordinary form of these things. But in everyday life, we're pretty on top of this life and death aspect of our reality.
Then I wanted to kind of pull at the idea of Frankenstein's monster specifically for a moment here. And, Mary Shelley really gave us this real next generation, if you will, of monster, kind of this modern monster, because it's a construct. It's not like vampires that were something and then received something. This was entirely new constructed item, the fiction, but it was this man's attempt to reassemble creation. And my question is, Eleanor, do you see some of the undead or those half-living beings that you're kind of having to write about as part of that same lineage, the idea that creatures are born not of like some kind of sorcery, but of a world that's forgotten that man needs a soul to live?
Oh, I think definitely, and I'm glad that you note with the creature in Frankenstein. We often think of him in terms of the Universal Studios version, where he's sort of patched together pieces. He's not. Victor Frankenstein creates this thing, this being. He is a being, and he, to all that, for as much as we can tell, has a soul because he's rational, right? And the way that he interacts clearly has a soul, which led my students when I was recently teaching it at the very end to say, "Hold on a second, he better worry about his existence after death, because that creature has done some pretty horrible things." But he constructs him. It's not that he takes body parts. It's like, I'm going to create a nervous system, and then I'm going to create, the cardiovascular system, and I'm going to put this all together. But I'm not going to tell you how I did it, because then you might be tempted to do it. And also, Mary Shelley just didn't have that much information. I mean, really, it's like, how would that work? That just doesn't. That's ridiculous. But and then using galvanism, so using electricity to try and create life. But I think he's very much part of that concern because it's the questions of the morality of human endeavor. If one can do it, ought one to do it? And what sort of monsters are you breeding when you play God? What sort of moral responsibility are you breeding when you play God? One of my favorite parts in Frankenstein is when the creature who's been rejected by his creator and stumbled around and is trying to figure out who or what he is, like a rejected infant, comes across these perfect cottagers who live in the wilderness. And by listening to them, he learns speech, how to read, and then he sits down and he reads Plutarch and Goethe and Paradise Lost. And one other book, which is from, oh, I've forgotten who wrote it, but it was one of the texts, the primary texts of the French Revolution. So he's being influenced by all of these ideas of the nobility of the ancients, but also what it is to be Adam versus his creator. And he starts to present himself. He gives a whole sort of defense of himself to Victor Frankenstein later on, but he defends himself in the light of high romantic ideals and this notion of I am your Adam and you, my creator, have rejected me. Therefore, I am basically, my moral fault is your fault. So, and it's extremely philosophically sophisticated, really fascinating. And one of your takeaway questions is by the end of the book, who is the monster in this book? Is it Victor Frankenstein? Is it the demon? He uses that word repeatedly, and a demon being perhaps a damn soul or perhaps the evil genius, the inspiration. So, I mean, there are lots of loaded terms in that book, and it's just not what people usually expect when they pick it up. But I think that when you have rejected God's authority and are playing God in an effort to regain control of this narrative of our existence that doesn't make sense, because you've thrown out all of the proper context, proper moral context. Well, now I'm going to make the context. I'm going to be in control. Here's my narrative. Here's my creation, and it's a monster. I mean, it's Mary Shelley. It presents so many of the aspects of the high romantics and the dark romantics, especially like her husband Percy Shelley. But she's also, in so many ways, seemingly exposing the horrors of the romantic experiment played out to its extreme, to the extremity.
Yeah. When I think of Frankenstein, and it's been so long since I've read Mary Shelley's because that was a high school requirement. So my favorite is Young Frankenstein. Obviously that's a Mel Brooks movie with Gene Wilder and Peter Boyle and the reception of the abnormal brain.
Yes, well, when teaching it to high schoolers, I had to work very hard not to lapse into Young Frankenstein quotations, because I don't know that they're old enough that their parents would let them watch it, because there are a couple of scenes in that movie. But no, there were a lot of moments where the brilliance of that particular film, yes, they impress themselves on one.
That's usually what I think about when I think of Frankenstein's monster. I'm like, yeah, Peter Boyle, I get it, right? But the Victorian mind itself, it seemed to live in this state of war between faith and science. Like we were talking about, the Enlightenment and the Industrial Age is coming. We're not like those superstitious rosary praying Catholics over there. This is where we are. We're moving into progress. And that meant the idea of resurrection was really more about reanimation. And so how was it, since you've written 3 of these so far, how was it that your novels explore that kind of divide where the horror is really theological and not so much physical?
Well, it is also physical too. So if you think of something where I started with A Bloody Habit, which was largely inspired by my work with Dracula. I mean, that's why is London the place of most promise to Count Dracula? Because nobody in London, they're enlightened, right? They don't believe in vampires. So they're not going to know what to do with this spiritually loaded but hyper physical being who's coming in and is preying on them in a very physical way that at the same time is damning souls. So it's got all that anxiety packed in, and it really was the foundation for me for my first narrator in the Gothic series, John Kemp, who is the quintessential enlightened Englishman who is alarmed at the thought of vampires, but is a lot more alarmed at the thought of papists. And he encounters these Dominicans who are very matter of fact about, oh yes, we just deal with these preternatural creatures. He's like, well, here's the problem. I'd rather, on some level, say I'm a lunatic because I believe in vampires, or than I would say what these Dominican friars are doing has any basis in reality. So that's more threatening. It's like, we can take ghosts, we can take goblins, we can take reanimated corpses. There's another Gothic novel called The Beetle. Oh, it's half sci-fi. It's so weird. It's this beetle comes into London. I mean, I'm not directly quoting, but I could be. I, the beetle. That's basically the response. And the beetle assaults women and all this other stuff. And the Victorians were horrified, terrified. It's such a bad book, but absolutely hilarious. They'd rather have that than they would have these papists confecting the Eucharist in their midst. It's just a lot easier to handle. And you get even weirder if you read the heavily influenced by the Gothic, but some of the novels of the Bronte sisters, because there's a line from Chesterton. They were in Yorkshire where Catholicism lingered longest, but in a superstitious form. And then industrialism was coming, and it brought this barbarous superstition as well. So you get this twisted, complex spiritual world, which I think is the only way to understand Wuthering Heights, incidentally, in a Christian but very, very Gothic context.
And then there was something about the Irish Gothic I was thinking about, how it seemed to contain this special kind of Catholic dread, right? Where you have the haunted churchyard, you've got the purgatorial ghost, and then it's heavily laden with the fairy superstition. And so what was it about Ireland for The Wake of Malice that you wanted to really dig into that perhaps fertile soil?
Oh, Ireland was each of my books, I found a location or an idea, and I can tell when it's working, when it keeps giving back. It's just parts of it write itself practically. And the sort of panoply of folklore and Gothic monsters, the Irish are just replete, and there were almost so many that I had to cut it back. At one point, I can remember my editor saying, "You're only allowed this many Gothic monsters in Ireland. You can't have them all." So I had to sort of restrain myself a little bit. I have a banshee, I have a puka. I mean, I had so much fun saying, all right, there's a lot here. And part of it, I think, is that this is something I think we see in Dracula, which was written by an Irishman, of course, is there's a little bit of, this is a darn good yarn, and we're gonna spin it as far as we can and just over egg this pudding here because it's just so much more fun. So there's a little bit of Irish exuberance, I think, even in the breadth of their horror. If they're going to be horrified, they're going to have it all, and it's just going to get bigger and better, and they're just going to build on it and build off each other, which I was able to do to an extent through having a very small community. My other two books moved around quite a bit. I had a small cast, focused on a small cast, but in Wake of Malice, I got into a community of a couple of hundred people, and we didn't leave. So that was really fun. But there too, have it be when you're in that small community and you think you're bound on an island here, and we're in the more rural area. Now you've got horrors, and it's right here at home. So it's not just we're in a metropolitan setting. Like my first novel takes place in London. So even death, it's sort of spread out a little bit. We don't have to go in the graveyard if we don't want to. And these graveyards are really creepy and overfull right now anyway. In Ireland, it's like, well, this is home. We're here with these dead bodies, and we're here with these horrible murders, and we are here with these dark occult happenings. And we really like telling ghost stories. So we're really going to sit and, moodily embrace our dark ideas. It feeds it. It really fed the atmosphere in a satisfying way. That the Irish were tremendous fun, and I was able to, because I have several Irish friends, to send drafts to them and to talk about the culture and the tradition with them, even the language, the use of different parts of the language, the relationship between the local community and the gypsy, uh, the travelers, their that community as well, what that would have looked like for a small rural community. And then you have these gypsies basically who are outside society, and you'd really love them to be the scapegoat because they are dabbling in this mixture of weird occult quasi Catholic practice. I have a friend who's descended from the Irish travelers, and he told me so many stories, some of which I was able to put in the novel. And I said, people are going to think I made this up, but I didn't. This really happens. No, it's a really rich area for delving into Gothic horrors, and I think too it's that it's the fact that it is a very Catholic culture, but poorly catechized, left to itself, repressed, hiding from the English. It's going to breed all sorts of irregularities.
Yeah, there's just something about that 19th century era that they seem to have really traded the mystery of the world for the machinery that was coming along. I mean, you've got, some variation of the undead or kind of the monster of that era. So obviously Shelley's Frankenstein or Stoker's Dracula or even Stevenson's Hyde, where there's like this spiritual vacuum that had developed and they wanted to fill it somehow. And throughout your novels, it feels like, and you can talk on this, it kind of feels like you're bringing back that, it's like you're resurrecting the sacred within that vacuum.
Oh, it's quite very much so, and I think that it's part of the mechanism that I absolutely love in the Gothic, and I've talked about this many times. I might have said this the last time we spoke, is that there's what I call the Gothic mirror effect. It's like a funhouse mirror. You're looking at something, it's horrible. Here's this monster, and then there's this moment of realization for those who have um, the moral eyes to see it, that I see monsters, I see horrors, but I recognize this is the reality I actually live in because as a fallen human being in need of grace, this novel reflects the monstrousness of my own soul. So finding the sacred and expressing it in the novels is because that is it's the environment in which I have coherence in my own life. I was speaking with the novelist Tim Powers, who's a good friend, and he is the most brilliant writer in supernatural fiction today, devout Catholic. And he was talking about, do I think there are vampires? Really? But I believe in things much more horrible than vampires and much more glorious. So this sense that I believe in salvation, I believe in damnation. And a Gothic novel lets me tangle with those themes in a way that if you tried to talk about life and death, salvation and damnation in like a polite drawing room comedy, it would be so preachy and obnoxious. It wouldn't be a good story. It wouldn't be a good story. But that's the bread and butter of the Gothic genre, right? Even if the protagonist doesn't make it, if you don't have a possibility of redemption, it's not a good Gothic novel. It's probably some cheesy, nihilistic, poorly written horror piece, which I don't like. It's not satisfying. It doesn't satisfy. You just go, oh, that was gross and disturbing, not, oh, there's a moral arc here. There's something that really identifies the reality of grace and sin.
And then on the note of zombies, so we've got, the idea that this is more modern zombie ideas, but zombies go way back. But the more modern ideas, the zombie kind of hungers for flesh, and then the leprechaun hungers for gold. And both of those are really just bottomless desires. They have no possible fulfillment. The appetite can never be satisfied. Do you see these more of like a critique of the Victorian obsession with, the spiritism while also growing in the modern progressive world? That there was like this obsession with possessing something, but no desire of becoming greater.
I think it even goes beyond the Victorians, because it's the temptation, as you said, to possess something, to control something, to own things, and through that collection, the amassing to oneself, you would somehow have, it's like a security blanket, but you can't take it with you and we all die, right? So it's the sense of, if I have enough, or I possess enough, or if I can own other human beings. You can see that throughout history, definitely in the Gothic genre. I mean, what is Dracula's entire modus operandi is to drink. There's the lunatic in Dracula. He says the blood and the life. He's quoting from Leviticus. The blood is the life. The blood is the life. And he just wants to consume blood and consume blood and consume blood. And then is terrified, actually, when someone says, "What about souls?" He's like, "I don't want souls. I don't want souls. I don't want to touch the souls thing. No souls, no souls, just the blood. Just want the blood." Because that's safe. It's that if I can hold on to, enough things, if I can collect enough things to myself, I will somehow ward off the reality of my own death, which doesn't work. It doesn't work. But it is a temptation for human beings. I mean, we see it today. There is the temptation to own as many objects and as many items as you have. And if I just had this would satisfy, the deepest yearnings of my soul. Well, St. Augustine tells us our hearts are restless until they rest in God. So that, I think, is a pervasive human struggle throughout history, and certainly for the Victorians, because the things they were doing, the progress that they were achieving, or the social strides, like, none of that was going to satisfy. None of that was going to satisfy. Aristotle, I mean, even if we weren't looking at this from a Christian vantage point, Aristotle would have told them, this isn't going to work. If you really want to understand human happiness, grow in virtue. Grow in virtue. It's not amassing items. Sorry, that's my dryer.
When we look at Frankenstein and we look at the zombie, we're talking about parodies of the resurrection, and maybe even, dare I say, a man-made image of the resurrection of Christ. Eleanor, your novels, they always lead back into redemption. They have this redemptive arc in them. And so what do you think the difference is between that reanimation that's more of a horrifying monster, and then the real resurrection, the resurrection that saves? And then with your particular monsters, how do you dramatize that?
Different ways. And I will say that one important note is, looking at my books, I see all these themes, and they're themes that are derived from what I believe, and what I believe is as a practicing Catholic. And looking back at the novels, I can see and say, "Oh, I see what this was." I will warn any eager young writers to know that if you set out to write a story and you go, "These are the themes I'm going to address, and this is going to be it's probably not going to be a very good story." So for me, it's that I know the horrors of human beings, and if I delve into characters and put them in a situation where they're encountering the preternatural, and permit these characters to blossom and to play it out, they are either going to find their way to the joy of redeemed happiness in one way or another. In fictional terms, that usually means, hey, the novel ends in some sort of marriage. It's like, that's hopeful. Or it's people are buried. It's either death or marriage, or both. Often both in my novels. So that's how, looking back at them, I can say, oh, I can see that the hope of the resurrection pervades this novel in this way, or that the effect of one's sins leading to damnation will play out in this way. But I wouldn't say that I set out deliberately to say this is going to be the direct result. However, having read enough in the Christian tradition, it teaches you how to write those stories. It teaches you the dynamic. It's biblical. It's seeking redemption, finding redemption, passing through the harrowing of hell to the wedding feast of the Lamb in the book of Revelation. And when you read a book that presents that narrative, which is the narrative we all hope is our own narrative, you find satisfaction in it. I mean, if you read a P.G. Wodehouse novel, you don't at the end say, oh, that was the book of Revelation. But on the other hand, the resolution of difficulties and the reestablishment of an orderly, well, I mean, it's Wodehouse, an orderly society at the end, that shows us, mirrors the dynamic of passing from the fall to, standing before our Lord in paradise. But as you were talking, I was thinking about teaching Tale of Two Cities, not a Gothic novel, although Dickens is very much influenced by the Gothic, and in many ways expresses himself as a Gothic novelist in many of his writings. But the dynamic there's a resurrection man who's stealing bodies to sell to medical students on the side. So there's bad resurrection. There's the monstrous mimicry of resurrection. And then there are the horrors of a new Jerusalem being constructed by the revolution. And you have these two cities. You have, of course, Paris versus London, but at the end, it's about the resurrection and the life and the eternal city in heaven. So that dynamic, that narrative trajectory pervades great works of fiction one way or another, sometimes on a very light, happy note, say with the Wodehouse example, and sometimes much more dramatically, as you get with A Tale of Two Cities. So I think if you look at any book that satisfies, Jane Austen, there's a degree of that trajectory playing out. And that also very much influences me as a writer, because that's just how I see the world operating that way. So I don't need to set out specifically to say, I'm going to talk about resurrection. In the end, I'm basically tacitly going to.
This is something I'm kind of thinking about from time to time, is that when you pull back the layers of lace, or the ideas of etiquette within that Victorian age, they're still holding on to some of the prim and proper things, but on the inside they're terrified of progress. They're terrified of doubting the future. And how do you think it is that these horror stories have come out in their time to give them permission to question the ideas of faith, of progress, without the idea that they're going to get in trouble for it?
I think that's a good description of it. I think one of the issues that you have in the Victorian period is you still have the framework of Christian society, but because you've thrown so many pieces out, it's not coherent anymore. And it's not as if you can say, oh, this entire construct is based in our understanding of moral theology. Even things like you talked about, manners or etiquette, which were grounded, many of them grounded or originated in a clear-sighted understanding of what it means to be a virtuous human being and to have a virtuous and stable society. Using the Jane Austen example again, I always talk to my students about, all right, let's talk about, are these hollow rules of courtship, or are there reasons behind them? Are the etiquette that is expected of a young unmarried female, is that just some sort of constraint, or is it actually something that in a coherent way should be protecting our heroine from being seduced by the rake of the novel? So I mean, are there things here that are here actually to protect and help us grow in virtue? But because we've thrown away the explanation, it ends up looking hollow, or even becoming hollow. But you still have so much of it still coherent. Today, it's so much less so. It's so much less so. So much more has been lost, that it is a sort of a post-Christian neo-paganism that we encounter in many walks of life, which, by the way, I think is yet an opportunity for hope, because in the same way as the Victorians then could dabble in the Gothic and resurrect these themes, something like a Gothic story gives us the space with a reader who, is already suspending disbelief by reading a Gothic novel, can encounter this framework, the Catholic framework, or a more ancient understanding of what we are as human beings, what our relationship is towards God, and how this entire existence thing works. So it gives us. You see this in Flannery O'Connor too. It's like, okay, we're just going to take this world and now we're just going to shift everything, put some radical transformative violence in there, and let's see how you, oh reader, taken out of your comfort zone, can wrestle with deeper and more real and more accurate themes.
Yeah, you had mentioned women in that Gothic period. I think that's a good thread we can pull on for a little bit here. Because there seemed to be this, I don't know, this placing of women kind of on a pedestal. This idea that women have this freedom within the etiquette, right? Like you said, it works to keep them from easily being swayed or whatever by the male protagonist or the bad guy or antagonist in the story. When we look at the women within the Gothic horror, and I'm wondering if there's some kind of ghost story. I'm going to use the word ghost story. That's kind of talking about the woman's inner world, right? It's not really about a ghost. It's about their own inner desires in the age, in this post-enlightenment age, this age of progress, and where they are battling with their own inner demons.
I think it's an important theme, and one that is as one of the funny aspects of the Gothic, actually, because they do cherish the women as they ought, right? Necessary to society, and it's man's role to protect and to cherish. Um, so there's a little bit of we will protect and cherish, but one of the elements there is that in major Gothic novels, it's almost like a rule. You're not adequately going to protect her, and you're certainly not going to equip her. So, I mean, there's a scene in Frankenstein where he's like, I love you passionately. I don't want anything ever to happen to you. Let me just leave you alone at night for a little while. Bye, honey. I mean, it's, or you see it in Dracula as well. They go back and forth and back and forth. Are we going to tell Mina what's going on? Or are we not? No, we don't want to disturb her. So let's just leave the window open at night and let her go to sleep. Don't bother with any protective measures. We're not really just going to tell you everything that's going on because we don't want the purity of your imagination to be shattered. It's like, you should really, if you could just inform, just give some information. How many times are these heroines supposed to faint? It's so there's an interesting dynamic there. Something I've even played with in my novels, where giving a little bit, especially in my second novel, Brother Wolf, which had a female protagonist, so she was my narrator, and moments where she was supremely frustrated. Seriously, not being informed here is endangering me. I'm not feeling, and she was not a hyper feminist or anything like that, but just saying this is not the best arrangement for me or for you. So let's just, I don't know, open the doors a little bit more. But there were concerns in some circles about frustrations in women. And a lot of them make sense in an historical context or a sociological context, because they're in 1851, I think it was, they did they called everyone together and they were counting all the people in England, and realizing that due to several wars and because of disease, there were too many women. They called them the odd women. And there were actually parliamentary debates about whether they should ship them off to Australia, whether they should set up Protestant nunneries of some kind, because the concern was these women can't provide for themselves. So we don't want them all ending up prostitutes, or how are they going to be supported? So that became a point of concern, and it is the struggle, making sure that women were still cherished in the society, but also were equipped in a way that, if needed, they could provide for themselves to some extent. Which in some ways, it's gone with feminism, sort of went off the deep end. It's its own monster now. It's sort of like lost many of the reasons that women were being cherished and protected, ideally, at that time. So yeah, no, that's it. That's all over. All over Gothic fiction too. another rich element that you see certainly in, for example, Dracula. It's all over there.
Right. And then there's this massive industrial factory boom going on in the same time period. And a lot of us today, a lot of blue collar workers today, actually benefit from the safety measures that had basically come out from all of the horrors of the work environment of those times. We have a lot of protections and fences and things like that today because of the accidents that had occurred in that industrial landscape. And so if I'm going to look at it from today, a modern, back into that time period, it's almost as if mankind is taking the material world and they're trying to purify the matter, but they end up being enslaved by their own technology.
Oh, I think that's something we can certainly speak to today. I read somewhere recently where they said that Pope Leo's uh, his industrial revolution is the technological advances and AI, and what it's doing to take jobs, and what it's doing to control our marketplace, or even blue collar workers. What it is doing to the way that human beings labor and earn the means to provide for themselves, and the dignity of work, and the way people are enslaved to technological devices. It's like the sense of, oh my goodness, I've misplaced my cell phone. I'm I'm denuded somehow. I can't function, or I can't find this or that or the other, or people can't get in touch with me. So there is a way that we can see um, our own horrifying, monstrous, the tyranny of so-called scientific and technological progress. Um, and I think that there's concern for what the material world, or the digital world, the virtual world, or whatever it is, um, does to us as human beings. Um, at the same time, I think that just like the Victorians, we're called to live in that time. Our struggles today are not a surprise to God. There's the line in the book of Esther: "Perhaps you were created for such a time as this." Similarly, we were created, you and I, to grapple with the horrors of our own era. For me, I feel safer doing that if I can, in fictional terms, toss us about 100 and some odd years earlier. Um, but but the themes are perennial.
It's true. And then I wanted to ask this for the last question, was that you did vampire in a bloody habit, you did werewolf, the next one, and then you did zombie, kinda, here in Wake of Malice. Can you just tell me about the different things that you found fascinated by those particular, the monsters, the vampire, the werewolf, the zombie?
Well, with the vampire, that was my earliest preoccupation with the Gothic. Um, the whole notion of the vampire as the anti-Eucharist really took fire in my mind, in the way that um, it was bound up with Victorian anti-Catholicism. So that for me was its primary selling point, and I spent a lot of time. I've spent a lot of time studying, teaching, and exploring the anti-Eucharistic elements there, and the anti-Catholic elements in that particular novel. When I moved to the werewolf, it was partly born from a conversation with my husband, where I said, vampire victims are like drug or alcohol addicts. And he listened to my theory. And then later he came back and he said, no, the werewolf is. Because theoretically, if you really play this out, the vampire victim is depending where we are in the trajectory here, is probably already damned. But it's not like a werewolf, where it's an inherent quality in the creature being acted on by an outside agent. So the alcoholic is an alcoholic whether he drinks or not, but the outside agent, like for the werewolf, the moon, or witchcraft, or drugs, there are different theories about the werewolf, that that predisposition, this radical predisposition towards vice, is acted on and responded to. So that was with the werewolf. It became a question of, well, if we've got a sober werewolf and then he relapses, what does that look like? And for the with with Wake of Malice and playing with the zombie leprechauns, what I was also really doing was looking at it not from the damsel of the vampire or the werewolf who is still alive and is struggling not to be damned, to what happens when someone is trying to, like, taking one more step back, someone is trying to awaken the occult to take control of demonic powers. What does that do to a community that now is dealing with dead bodies and with the dabbling in the occult? So that was, it was almost as if I was looking at different stages of occult lapses. It's like the vampire already far gone. The werewolf is in the throes of it, and in that community in Wake of Malice, what's being awakened when someone delves into that and seeks that, what is that going to do to the entire community?
Fantastic. And then, to be funny, since we know that traditionally, Van Helsing tells us that, werewolves are usually slain by the silver bullet, I wonder if chocolate would be deadly to a werewolf.
That would be satisfying. You could actually, instead of almonds, you could put silver in it.
Right. Silver chocolate.
Man. Silver chocolate, or chocolate with silver nuts in it. Yeah. I think it works.
It's kind of funny. I mean, humans aren't allergic to chocolate, but some are. But would the werewolf be allergic to chocolate? That's the ultimate question.
Well, it would probably it's a good point, because then you'd be dealing with the sort of spiritual side. The pure ore of the silver would be killing the sort of preternatural half, say, if we were able to divide it. And then the fact of the werewolf having that canine predisposition, it would deal with him materially at the same time. So I think actually silver laced chocolate is a really good, I should have thought of that.
Fantastic. That's great. Just one more time, drop where people can find more of you. If you have a blog, a website, obviously your books can be found on Amazon, but anything else you want to plug at the end?
You are welcome to go and see my website, which my daughter keeps reminding me I need to update, is eleanorbourgnicholson.com, and contact me through that. I love to hear from readers.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for your time, and I appreciate you coming back on my show.
Thank you so much for having me. You have a lovely day.
You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Thank you for listening. This is a free podcast based upon the value for value model. If you find value in this, or any episode, you can return that value by liking the show, subscribing to this channel, leaving a review, or sharing with a friend on your social media accounts. You can also donate on my website. Thank you again. This is BT for Truth and Shadow Podcast. You are the light in the darkness.
It's a very strange, funny time where everybody would love to be able to be themselves if they can.
And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. You take the red pill. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more. You stay in Wonderland. Believe whatever you want to believe.
Fight every battle, everywhere, always. In your mind. Every possible series of events is happening all at once. Live that way, and nothing will surprise you. Everything that happens will be something that you've seen before.
Because they must fall in line with the person in front of them. You want to live that kind of life? I wish you the best. I'll be on the other side somewhere.
The truth, nothing more.